Hello, welcome to the Hope, Health, and Healing podcast. I am Michelle Hannah Fields, and I am your host for episode 43 as we once again join my friends Phil and Amy Martin in part 2 of this two-part series. In this episode, Phil and Amy are sharing what their journey of faith has looked like after their son went through a heart transplant, the days after that were hard, trusting God for healing, and how through it all, friends and family supported them. They also talk about what it looked like to have to release Grant into God's hands as his healing happened in heaven. They also share what it has looked like walking through this intense grief. Sit back, relax with your favorite cup of coffee or beverage of your choice, and allow Phil and Amy to share their hearts with you and encourage you, even if you're walking through grief or even if you've never walked through it, because one day you will have to walk through grief, and their story will inspire you and give you hope that there is peace on the other side.
You know, from the heart transplant, the next few days was hard, but just I remember that time, and I remember you sharing like where you saw God in those moments. So share a little bit about that.
Yeah, and so something you mentioned earlier was there in the hospital, like when we knew, I prayed and prayed that when we knew that he was not going to survive, I prayed that God would take him and we would not have to make a decision about taking him off life support. And that was when I reached those moments where I couldn't pray. I could not pray anymore.
Yeah.
And I just I would even start to pray, and I thought it was like a block.
Yeah.
And I had people that were lifting us up, and they were praying for us, that intercessory prayer. They were the ones lifting us up to pray for us. And so seeing that was a big deal for us. And then when we actually came home from the hospital after we had to make the decision to discontinue life support, and it was just the worst day ever.
Right.
And just coming home and just sitting there and thinking, I'm a Bible teacher, I'm a pastor, and I remember my brother asking me, well, what are you going to do now? And I thought, I can't pray, but I'm going to lean further into my faith. I actually told him that. I said, I'm going to lean further into my faith. And then a trusted friend who, but anyway, he emailed me and he said, I'm so sorry this happened. He said, trust me that you're going to spend more days with Grant in the future than you ever had in the past. And it was like there was a little bit of a little light piercing the darkness then. That it was such a dark moment. But just the thought of the story's not over.
Yeah.
That Grant's not physically here, but and he was absolutely right. I've got more days with Grant in the future than I ever had in the past. And it was like that was sort of the beginning of hope for me after he died.
Yeah.
And then a friend of mine who's a pastor, he told me, he said, look, he said, I can't tell you what to do. He said, it helps me to just journal. He said, don't worry about formatting or anything. He said, just sit there and get thoughts in your head, just get them out on paper. He said, and I think that helps. And so sitting at home trying to recover, I started just writing out my thoughts and feeling. They were raw. And I think Amy was really worried about me because a lot of times I would be back in my office and I would just be for hours just like putting out on paper those thoughts and still just trying to pray. And little bit by little bit, God would lead me to scriptures, and some very important scriptures. and I would cling to those scriptures. I would go back to those scriptures repeatedly. Like, 1 Thessalonians 4, that we don't grieve as those who have no hope.
Yeah.
That was the first one that I was like, we can grieve differently because we do have hope.
Right.
That's the difference.
Right.
There's people that have no hope. They grieve differently.
Yeah.
They still grieve, but they grieve differently than those who have hope.
And I think that's true because, I mean, we still grieve. We still grieve. But it's different how we grieve, how we process, and that we grieve knowing we have more days ahead of us.
Knowing that there's going to be a time when God wipes away every tear.
Mm-hmm.
There's no more sorrow, no more pain.
Yeah.
That's going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And then, we wound up putting on Grant's headstone, and I wasn't even looking for this when I found it. I was just going back through Job again, sitting on my back porch in the days after the funeral, and just still reeling and just thinking, I got to reread Job because I'm mad. I'm mad that we lost him. I'm mad things did not go the way it did when he was 5 years old. Like, this was not the plan.
Right.
And I was grieving my expectations for his life. I was missing him, but I was missing the future that I thought that he had. And so as I'm reading through Job, hit Job 19, and right there in the middle of Job says, despite all of this, in the end, I'm going to see God in my flesh. And I just thought, that's such a, right there, Job 19, such a verse of hope. That Job knew everything that he was going through, that was this side of life.
Right.
But there was going to be a day when he would see God in his own flesh, and there would be victory. And so that's actually the verse that we had put on Grant's headstone, because we just thought, well, that was Grant's favorite book of the Bible, and that really just resonated with us, and so that was just really, really important for us.
How did you see God moving for you and helping you through that time?
Definitely, we had people there every day while we were at the hospital, and so just having that support meant a lot. Of course, it also could be a little tiring too, because we were just drained emotionally, and so sometimes it was a lot for us to sit and talk to people, but it meant a lot that people cared enough they took the time out of their busy schedule, put their life on hold to come to see us in Atlanta and spend hours with us. And just people texting, just, I'm thinking about you, because sometimes you feel like that was a long period of time for us to wait. Sometimes it can feel like you've been cut off from the world, and people go on with their life and they've forgotten about you. So that's
your life. Your world has stopped spinning. And everybody else's just keeps going.
But just that little, I'm thinking about you today. I mean, you would think that doesn't mean a whole lot, but it really does. It meant a lot that just to know people are still thinking about us and praying for us meant a whole lot. And then afterwards, Phil talked a lot about his journaling, and we already talked about how different we are. I am not a writer. I'm not really a reader. I have my little, YouVersion daily things I do, or the, Bible recap. But other than that, I am not a huge book reader. So, and I told you I'm not an emotional person either. So I have handled grief totally different than Phil. He is out there with it. He's writing about it. He wants to talk about it. And I process it internally, because I told him, I said, for me to I can't talk about, I don't know, it's harder for me to talk about it.
Yeah.
I mean, you can see this now. But we did a GriefShare ministry at our church, and I think that helped a lot because it's a video series that you watch, and they talk about what you're going to go through with grief and how you can handle it and process it, and so I think that helped me a lot. So
and I agree with that. GriefShare I recommend to anybody.
Yeah.
It's such a powerful ministry.
Do y'all have one through your church now, or
well, that one ended, and we'll be starting a new one at some point. We just haven't scheduled it.
Gotcha. Yeah, we have them at Evangel too. Ours is starting in February. So by the time this airs, it might be already started, but we have them regularly too. And I know my mom, when my dad passed away, she went to a GriefShare, but it was years later when she actually went to a GriefShare, and then she wound up teaching it, and so she taught it several times, and it really is a great program to go through just to kind of help you process grief,
And it helps you to realize that you're not alone.
Yeah.
That other people, even though grief, it's this weird thing, right? That grief is unique for everybody.
Right.
And yet, there's so much that we have, grievers have in common. And so it's like, sometimes people might make a comment to me about, oh, well, you're experiencing this, and I would think, no, I'm not. But then later on, I might experience that.
Yeah.
Or kind of the, I kind of make light of the Kubler-Ross stages of grief, and I'm like, that doesn't apply. That, and which really, the Kubler-Ross stages of grief was really about people losing their jobs. That's how that model was developed.
Gotcha.
It was not for people losing family members, or losing loved ones and all that. And so, because I felt like stages of grief, to me, stage implies you leave one stage to go to the next stage. And I'm like, nope, that's
this
not
is cyclical.
I'm all over the place. I am hitting every stage back and forth. And I told Amy, I said, I am such a, I wouldn't necessarily say extrovert, but I'm such a feeling person that I can't shut feelings off. And so it's I can't help not feeling things all the time. Kind of every emotion is I just the Pixar series Inside Out, where he's got all the little different emotions and all that. That's me, but it's all the emotions were just going 100%, crazy.
Yeah. So you're journaling, and you're getting your thoughts on paper, and you're processing internally. And we all grieve differently. How did you see God really just healing you through that process? And I think it's always going to be an ongoing healing. You're never completely healed, but how you see God healing that,
because that is
it's not.
Point, is that
there's no end point.
Right. There's not until
not until you go to heaven. Yeah.
All things are made new.
Yeah.
That's the end.
That's the end point.
Right.
Yeah.
Of the new beginning. So for me, I teach high school Bible in addition to my pastor duties, and so having to stand in front of 100+ teenagers 5 days a week to teach about Jesus was forcing me to confront my grief daily. I couldn't get around it. It was nope, here it is. And I felt like God was telling me, trust me, that it's okay for your students to see you cry. Especially, for some of the teenage boys who have never seen their dad cry. It's okay that if I'm in the middle of a lesson and I'm teaching them something, and all of a sudden, I just get overcome with something, And so that was part of the journey, part of how I saw God working was, and I had a lot of my students would just write me notes, or they would come. A lot of my students came to the visitation or came to the funeral, and they were supporting us all along the way. And even when it was Grant's birthday, my students even had like all day long we had an ongoing 6 periods in a row birthday party for Grant. And Amy actually took the day off from work, and she came and joined us that day. So there was the journaling for one thing, and then because a lot of times I'm going down a lot of my thought processes when I'm driving down the road, and then I think, like a little thought is going around, and I'm thinking, okay, when I get somewhere, I've got to write that down, and I got to pull that thread, and see where that goes. So sometimes it was that way in the middle of class, and I'm teaching. All of a sudden, a point would be made out of my mouth that I didn't plan, and I would say it. And I remember one time, like a girl looked at me, she said, "That'll preach," and I thought, I gotta write that down. and I went or whatever the point was, I wrote it down, and so it was a little bit of I was already journaling anyway, just to help articulate things and get all the jumbled up stuff, get it out. But then having to dig into Scripture and hopefully gently leading students to love Jesus, to trust Jesus on a daily basis, and then thinking again, like when he was 5, all eyes are on me. They're looking at me to see how I'm going to handle the death of my son. And as a pastor, all eyes are on you. Like, are you going to push or point the sheep toward Jesus? Or it could have gone the other way.
Right.
And so on a daily basis, it was just like the responsibility I had to my students, kind of God's sovereignty forced me to dig deeper into Scripture, forced me to dig deeper into my prayer life. And then it was like where I'd gone through that season of I couldn't pray. I would try and just like, it was like a black wall. And then all of a sudden, like as hope kept breaking through, and hope just kept breaking through, and then it was like my prayer life went to another level that it hadn't before. And so for me, that's kind of how I saw God working in that, was my interaction with my students, their love and their support for me. Honestly, there was, and I told the students, I said, I'm going to be honest with you, I'm grieving. I'm not going to hold back from them, because they need to see that, because they need that modeled for them as well.
Right, because they're going to walk through something hard, and they'll be able to point back.
And I even had a day, this is the weirdest thing, because you never know when grief is going to hit you, right? You never know. And like this school year, see you at the pole. We're out there early before school starts, and all of a sudden, like the biggest grief wave hit me, and I thought, what is going on?
Where did that come from?
Classroom, and I just told my students, I said, I can't teach today. And a student said, I got you, Mr. Martin. And he came and took the clicker from me, and I got all my Google Slides ready to go, and he just read through the Google Slides and ran class. And then second period rolled around, I kind of explained what was going on, and a girl in class said, oh, I'll do it, Mr. Martin. And then by the end of the day, I was kind of like, the grief wave had kind of lifted, but it was students, and they will never know the impact they had on me, that when I couldn't hardly breathe, they were lifting me up.
Yeah.
They were the ones that I thought, they're the ones that are lifting me up as the teacher.
Yeah.
and then it just made me love them even more, and then made me want to dig in and even be a better teacher.
For sure.
To reciprocate that. So.
And that goes back to community.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Yeah. Amy, how about you?
I feel like through it all, through, the stages of grief, I've talked about how we handle it differently. I feel like his writing and journaling has really helped him, handle his grief, and but and like he said, he kind of has this feeling like he has students that he has to be there for every day. With me, I kind of feel like I kind of have to like put my emotions aside, because I teach little ones. It's not as easy for me to stop and know. But and so I think that's part of my brain, is that I just kind of put my emotions on hold. I get through the day. I do what I got to do. But there have been times where, especially when we've come up on holidays and birthday and just significant events, it's always, and I feel like for both of us it's like this, it's leading up to the event, the anticipation of it, where grief has tended to hit me harder. Christmas, it wasn't Christmas Day, it was 2 or 3 days before.
Right.
Just the thinking about Christmas is coming and he's not here.
Yeah.
And so I've had a harder time with those times where I guess life has slowed down a little bit, but yet you're coming up to those important events. But just having that background of faith, like I've talked about, and just staying in God's word, and just having a positive attitude that God's with me, he's going to get us through this. It gets a little easier as time goes by. It's not quite as raw, but we're still just a year and a half out, and so I still feel like it's still raw.
For sure.
This Christmas was the second one. You get through the first one and you think, okay, the second will be easier, but it it's
Second
still
one was
hard.
a lot harder for both of us.
Yeah, and I think, like you said, people say time will heal. Time doesn't heal, but what it does is you see God's grace moving, and God's grace has been with you, and in those moments when grief overtakes you, God's grace is there in bountiful supply too. And so that's really what carries you through. And I say what I've seen in my own life is, through time I have more smiles than tears. And that, I think, is the difference. And God really helps you through those times. So let's talk about your book. So your book, Grieving with Jesus, at what point did you think, I need to put this in a book?
Well, you mentioned something to me at an Emmaus event.
I don't remember that, but okay.
You did.
I'll take credit for it.
But I had just, I had no intention of setting out to write that book at all. I was just needing to, it was almost like an oxygen mask for me. Writing and then being able to go back and looking, and I had mentioned to you at an Emmaus event that I'd been doing a lot of just writing, and I was like, over summer break I had written, or not over summer break, it was before that. I think it was going into spring break, that I had written like well over 100 pages of just gobbledygook, just unorganized and all. And you had made a comment. You said, well, you know what you got to do next is you're going to have to put it in a book. And I thought, this is not like book stuff. But then, like within days or weeks or so, I just remember this one particular moment of, and it was usually Amy and I, we carpool, we share a car. And so this was like last school year, so she wasn't at the same school as me, so she dropped me off. But I just remember this one day thinking, like a thought popped in my head, and I thought, but I can put that thought over into this bucket over here. And I realized, I was like, wait a second. And I was thinking about how we're supposed to love God with our heart, soul, mind, and strength. And I was like, that's all of what we are. That is us. That's everything we are. Heart, soul, mind, and strength. And I really was thinking the grief affected every one of those. Mentally, physically, emotionally, and spiritually. It affected all 4 of those. And I started realizing, I was like, wait, and I went back through my notes and I thought, every one of these fits into one of those categories. It's the loss. It was the triggering event that everybody has in common that's grieving. Like, we can all, every griever can say, well, here was the loss. That's what started it. But then when you think about how the way it affects you, it's got to affect you mentally, physically, emotionally, and spiritually. And then how do you process through that? And when I realized that, and I started grouping my notes together that way, and it was like, it just crystallized. And I thought, all right, if this is helping me, then it could help others. And because this had really helped me to understand that God was with me in the grief. God was right there grieving with me.
Right.
And so, because none of this was God's design, there's when it comes to God's sovereignty, it's what God causes and what God allows, right? But God's design was not sin to begin with. The sin is this fallen world that we're in. Grant's heart condition was a result of this sinful world, right? But the hope, the future, that physical future we've got in the with Jesus, and realizing that, okay, all of that's going to be, the curse is going to be lifted. All of that's going to be made new. And I thought, when a thought came to mind, I thought, well, at least I've got a bucket to put that in. Like, that's like emotional, or that's spiritual, or this is physical, or this is something mental. I was like, well, sometimes, like, maybe I've got to decide. A thought pops in my head. I got to decide, is that from God or is that from Satan? And I thought, well, there's like a truth and lies, mental capacity to it. There's this emotional capacity. But then there's also like the future, the hope and the peace that we have, that God's promised. This is in His Word, that He's promised that He's going to wipe away those tears. That, and it's like that. It's that hope that starts penetrating all that darkness and gets bigger and bigger and bigger. Not that you don't still experience all those waves of grief, and that's how it was described to me, as it would be a wave of grief. And I thought, that's appropriate, but also to me it feels like an island of grief. It feels like sometimes the wave picks me up and just deposits me on an island of grief, and I'm just there on that island. And not that I stay on that island, but sometimes like I feel like that. It's one of the things I got from GriefShare. The main thing I took away from it was checking my grief every day, every morning, to think, what's my grief doing right now? It's a thing. It's not going away. It's not as sharp and intense as it was over time. But also, it's still there. It will still rear its ugly head at times. But the antidote is hope.
Right.
The antidote is the promises that God's given us, and that's what we cling to. We cling to those promises, because I know I'll see Grant again. That Grant's in that great cloud of witnesses.
Right. Yeah, I love that. And, I think it's important to realize, like you said, like, grief is going to come. It's not a one and done. It's a process. And even, my mom has said, my dad's been gone almost 20 years. She still has grief hit her sometimes, out of nowhere. For whatever reason, and you don't ever know, you can't anticipate when it's coming. It just comes. And, I think in those moments, it's just allowing yourself that moment and realizing, okay, well, God's going to carry me through this moment of grief too, this wave of grief, and then He's going to say, peace, be still. And then you'll have times when you're just good, and then another wave of grief will hit, and he'll say, peace, be still.
Yeah.
And
In
like
that peace, I will say this, I did want to tell you this one thing is, back in the spring, on Saturday, I'm sitting there getting my lesson plans ready for the next day, or for the next week, and all of a sudden, like, grief just came crushing in on me. And I mean, I'm doing lesson plans, and I'm sobbing like crazy, and I felt like, where earlier I had said, that prayers had once felt like tangible to me, it felt like just darkness descended on me. And then I prayed, and I just said, God, I need help. I need this to be lifted. I need some kind of hope or whatever. And it was within, at least an hour, maybe half hour, but no more than an hour, that one of Grant's friends texted me and said, hey, I'm praying for you. Unprompted by nothing other than the Holy Spirit, right? And all of a sudden, I see that text message from him that, hey, I'm praying for you. Just hearing from somebody.
Yeah.
And I told Amy, the rest of that Saturday, I felt like I was on narcotics. Because I was almost giddy with just peace that passed understanding. Like, heard that? I had never experienced that kind of peace where I was like, I couldn't have been lower. Hours ago, couldn't have been lower than I was. And then all of a sudden, I told Amy, I said, I want to bottle this up. Like I don't want this to ever fade away, because I feel like I'm on something right now. And it was just God giving me peace.
Yeah.
And so, like, little things like that, little markers like that, where I go back to that sometimes, I'm like, God, just give me your presence. That's all I'm asking for.
Yeah.
You don't have to give me answers. Give me your presence.
Yeah. That's so good. So good. Anything else you want to share, Amy?
I don't think so.
Okay.
I'm good.
Well, again, thank y'all so much for just coming and sharing. I know that this is going to touch so many people, and I will put a link to your book on the podcast, and just I know that God's going to continue to bless y'all in this journey, and that He's just going to open doors for you to help other people. So thank y'all again.
Yeah, I think God will use it. I had a conversation as we close out. Had a conversation with a gentleman at my church, and he retired Coast Guard, retired from the police force, and he was kind of there. We're just having coffee, and he's telling me some stories, from his life. And then in the middle of he just stopped and he looked at me. And he said, "You've got a purpose." Like he said, "Would you want to take your son out of heaven, out right now from the presence of Jesus?" I said, "No." And he said, "That's right." He said, "You wouldn't want to take him from that." He said, "But you're still here because you've got a purpose." And just hearing that, I was like, wow. Like God's reminding me that I've got a purpose, and part of that purpose is to help people in their grief journey. It's unique for everybody, and yet there's some things we have in common.
That's right.
And so if I can connect with other grievers to say, I understand your grief situation is unique, because mine's unique, but also here's some things we have in common, and here's how I can hopefully help and point you to trust in Jesus.
Yeah, that's so good. Well, thank y'all again, and we'll have you on again one day and share how you've seen God move since this moment.
And thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Hope, Health, and Healing. I know that Phil and Amy have just given you some hope for walking through a season of grief. Maybe you haven't experienced losing a child. Maybe you've lost a parent or a sibling or a close friend. Maybe you've lost someone you looked up to. Grief can also be the loss of your dream, what you envisioned your life to be. Maybe you walk through divorce or a separation with a close friend. No matter what type of grief we walk through, God is there to comfort us, to give us strength, and to help us walk into each day. Take what Phil and Amy has shared with you and let it minister to you as you walk your own path of grief. Be sure to check out the links in the show notes for where you can purchase Phil's book, Grieving with Jesus. Join us next time on Hope, Health, and Healing as Grace Jernigan Cadenhead shares her story of grief and what it has looked like for her as she grieved the loss of her husband and how God is blessing her in chapter 2. If you have not followed our show, be sure to follow our show, like and share with your friends, and then leave us a comment or a review. Thank you and have a great day. We'll see you next time on Hope, Health, and Healing.